what do we need to be doing? What does responsible AI look like? The businesses that are going to be successful are the ones that are on board with paying attention to those things. In this day and age, you can't be a leader in a company, particularly in a tech company, and not be paying attention to AI governance. Hugely important.
Welcome to Canada Now. I'm Ashley Smith, and every week we dig into the bold ideas, real stories, and fresh perspectives shaping Canada's future. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Canada Now, the show where we explore the people, ideas, and systems shaping what's next for Canada. I'm your host, Ashley Smith. Today, we're talking about artificial intelligence, not as hype or theory, but as an operational shift already reshaping real industries, real jobs, and real decision-making. I'm joined by Karen Olsson, a tech entrepreneur, fractional CEO, and strategic advisor with decades of experience building and guiding technology-driven organizations. As a principal at Atomic 47, Karen works with founders and leadership teams at the intersection of AI, emerging technology, and business transformation, helping organizations move from experimentation to execution. Known for her ability to see patterns before they're obvious, Karen brings clarity to complexity, especially in moments of uncertainty and scale. She's also deeply engaged in questions of ethical innovation, AI governance, and how leaders can move quickly without losing trust, a perspective shaped by her work across highly regulated and operationally complex sectors. In this conversation, we dig into what's actually happening on the ground as AI moves from novelty to infrastructure, what this moment means for Canadian organizations, and why adoption, governance, and leadership matter just as much as technology itself. Karen, welcome to Canada Now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Ashley.
I do really appreciate it. I think AI is just one of these topics that some people are probably so tired of talking about, but at the same time are probably not really getting into the heart of what's happening. I have some burning questions, but before we dive into them, what I would really love to know is just a little bit more about you, your professional story, how you got involved in this side of technology. And I know that you started looking at agentic technology, perhaps before some others were. So I'd love to just set the stage for the conversation as we move forward so the audience listening has a good grasp of where you're coming from.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So depending on how far back you want to go, I have spent almost all of my career in technology in one way or another. A lot of it has been on the operations side of the technology practices and very much in the HR and recruitment side. So the experience I have in tech is deeply human. It's very much about who are the people who create tech and how do people work together to innovate. And that's really kind of been a foundation of my career path. I started my journey in AI in 2016. I worked for a company that was doing AI moderation tools. And at the time, it was sort of funny because really it wasn't it wasn't AI the way we know it right now. It was very much like a filtering technology, the smart filtering that could, identify, poor language or inappropriate behavior on gaming platforms. But that was my first sort of foray into AI. And then in 2018, I founded this company together with my husband, who is a deep technologist. So we make a good pair. He is deep tech, natural language processing AI, agentic AI, and I am very much the humanistic, how are we going to govern this? How are we going to build this properly? So we started Atomic 47 Labs, less in AI and more in blockchain, although we always had in mind that it was going to be emerging technologies that we were going to focus on. We started looking at agentic AI right at the very end of 2022, 2023. We started to look at what that meant. David, who is my partner in the business and partner in life, he's one of these guys who's always kind of ahead of the curve. He started saying agentic AI is where it's going to go. And we were just at the very kind of early stages of people starting to use more of the generative AI and then what, is like ChatGPTs and some of those generative outputs. We started building our own agentic platform I guess, late 2023. And we are just at the commercialization stages with it now. And the timing is kind of perfect. We know that, the market is all afire about agentic AI. and that people are really trying to figure out, how to use it. And I think one of the key things that kind of gets missed in all of this is this orchestration layer that's really important. So you can build all these agents, but unless you actually have controls in place, and that kind of goes back to the ethical and operational side of AI, without having an orchestration layer, you just have a bunch of agents, right? So the orchestration layer is the important piece of, how do those agents behave? What do they need to do? Where are their checkpoints? I mean, we've all experienced probably ChatGPT or one of the LLMs lie to us, right? Like tell us just outrageous things that are not correct, or even minor things that are not correct. And with agentic AI, you can eliminate a lot of that hallucination through an orchestration layer. So we were really excited about what we put together and what we see in the marketplace, and the response from the marketplace to what we've built.
I want to dive into that a little bit more, but just to make sure folks are all on the same page, I know that in the audience, there's probably people who have spent a lot of time thinking about this and studying, where things are. But just to lay the foundation as fairly as we can you give me sort of explain it to me like I'm 5 years old? Like, what is agentic AI? Just in case.
Yeah. So most people are like, oh, agentic AI, there's a chatbot on your website. And yes, that is an agent, right? It talks to you, it responds, it can go look up information for you, and it can behave like a human to some degree, with limitations. And what is also agentic AI is, agents that can go and search and compile data and create, data lakes or knowledge graphs without having a human necessarily in the loop constantly. And then where agentic AI gets really interesting is when you have multiple agents all working together, kind of in a symphony. And it's why we use the term orchestration, because you have all these agents that are doing very specific tasks, whether it's, building tech or checking data, or could be anything, ordering bills of materials kind of thing. All of those tasks that you have an agent do, it becomes more meaningful when those agents can actually work together like succinctly.
And so let's come back to a little bit to the work that you're doing. I think that there is a lot of hype and a lot of mystery even around AI. I think it's a word we all like to use, and most of us, I think, still do think about that generative language model type of interaction. When it comes to the type of work you're doing, what sorts of organizations or industries are using this type of technology effectively today? And maybe you don't need to give us names, but maybe just examples of the types of ways that they're putting the AI to work and it's making a meaningful difference in their operations.
Yeah, I think healthcare is a big one. We know that our healthcare system is overtaxed, overburdened, and agents can take a lot of the low-level work that is being done, whether that's patient callbacks from agents that make phone calls and actually have voice interaction. We can see applications of it in pharmacy. Like pharmacy is highly regulated, and a lot of the challenges in pharmacy come from things like clawbacks and human errors. And so AI can structure workflows within a pharmacy that force compliance, and so clawbacks don't happen, or chargebacks don't happen. And then we see it also in other highly regulated industries. Like if you take oil and gas, for instance, there can be predictive analytics on systems that monitor, for leakages, or, in our case, we've built one that is particular for quality control compliance. And we see that, that's a highly, highly regulated, inspector-driven industry. Most facilities can't open until they pass quality control. It's like the last mile. And again, it comes down to a labor shortage of skilled workers who can actually do that work. And so if you can speed up the process and the information flow and create data integrity, you can alleviate some of those workflows. So, everybody always talks about, I know AI is going to take our jobs. And I firmly don't believe that. I think AI is going to make our jobs better. It's going to take away low-level work that people don't necessarily want to be doing, because, we see all these labor shortages, and it's going to open up, professionals and others to do work that's meaningful and interesting. I think the more that we see AI taking on some of those, challenging workflows, the more humans are going to be able to actually connect with one another. And it'll be that level of meaningful work that will, in my opinion, make the workplace a better environment.
Clearly, a lot of this will have been very new for an organization, for example, to be able to look back, year one, year two, and its implementation and what sort of advantages and metrics they can look at to see, how has it really changed what we've been doing besides maybe some anecdotal stuff. But I'm curious, have you seen any of those sorts of metrics? Have you seen any sort of real data that showcases how some of the folks or companies that you're working with have been able to really move the needle on their, say, mission and just their objectives?
We've seen incremental gains. I would say things are still it's early days, but, we have seen in the case of like municipal government using AI for certain tasks, certain community engagements, we've definitely seen like the gains there. A clerk doesn't have to be answering the same question over and over again, and it opens them up to do more meaningful work. And so we see that ROI coming back. A lot of times, I think what we've seen is a lot of pilots have run and people are like, well, we ran this pilot and we don't really know even what the ROI is that we're looking at. So I think there does need to be more meaningful engagement at like the senior level in organizations to really understand what impact AI can have. One of the challenges that I've seen is that you have this worker bee level where people are like, hey, I'm going to use ChatGPT, or I'm going to use Claude or Grok or whatever it is they're going to use. And I'm going to pump all this information in and it's going to make, my workflow much better. And then you have a middle management layer going, well, wait a sec, you can't do that. We don't want you to use these tools. Don't use these tools because it's, you're pumping in our IP and our domain knowledge. So we don't want you doing that. And then, you have leadership going, oh, we absolutely need to use AI. And it's like, there's like this disparate layering of kind of the perception of what AI can do for a business. And so I think, there's some really important pieces that organizations can do. And it has to come from the top down, understanding where the bottlenecks are in a business and what the challenges really are for them and what their goals are. Like if your goal is, to put out 30% more reports, you really have to take a hard look at, okay, well, what's the bottleneck? And is it a human-driven bottleneck or is it an automation bottleneck? And can it be taken on by AI? And so those things have to come from the top down. So guardrails are really important.
I do want to dive into the guardrails piece, but I am wondering maybe more from the momentum side first. Mm-hmm. If you're a decision maker, if you're an executive at a company or in an organization, and you're really thinking about, okay, we're going to figure out how to make sound decisions around these things. But before we kind of jump into that, what kind of questions may they want to be asking themselves? I guess my question is, are they going into boardrooms and saying, like, how should we use AI to create efficiencies? Or should they be asking themselves other types of questions and that might lead them to the technology or the systems that can then help support whatever improvements or new ways of doing things? What comes first? And I mean that in like the most effective way. Like, how are you seeing leaders effectively have these kinds of conversations to drive good decisions?
What's the chicken or the egg?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that one of the most important things is for an organization or a business to understand what their goals are. Like, is your goal to onboard more clients? Is it to have a higher client satisfaction? Are you looking at, your bottom line and are there values attached to that? Are you triple bottom line? Like you really have to start with the business goals. If the business goals are to build efficiency, what percentage of efficiency do you expect? And there's always trade-offs. It's like, if you're expecting a 50% increase in efficiency, you're probably losing headcount, right? So it's like, you have to look at what are your business goals and start there. And then, layer down into an organization and understand, what are your people doing? Like, what is the work that people are doing? And what's the meaningful work people are doing? And what are the tasks that, they don't necessarily need to have their hands on? And can that be automated so that you can create more value? I can go back to the pharmacy example if that helps. It's like, the most ROI for a pharmacist is doing clinical care. So whether that's vaccinations or, consultations, those are more highly paid within a pharmacy. And so if a pharmacist can free up 30% of their time because they're not having to answer the same questions over and over again for staff, and they have more time to do clinical care, that's an increase to your bottom line. That's a more profitable pharmacy.
Are you seeing any best practices in terms of trying to figure out where these kinks are? Like, are leaders who maybe not always in the busy bee, in the weeds of operations, are they having some sort of like streamlined communication with these employees, or are they getting on the ground and like trying to figure out and familiarize themselves with some of the processes to figure out where some of those gaps might be? I'm just curious. I'm sure there's different ways of doing it, but I'd love to know if there's any sort of key principle behind, getting in and really understanding workflows, for example.
One of the things we do is we put our clients through an AI readiness kind of rigor. It's like we put them through sort of the track of like, have you thought about X? Have you thought about Y? Have you thought about like who's doing what in your organization? Map out for us what it looks like. How is your data managed? Like, are you using spreadsheets? Like how is information travel across your organization? So we ask some pretty hard questions to really kind of get a snapshot of how an organization runs. And then we can start to dig down into, okay, well, do you understand that you're doing these 5 things paper-based and these 7 things digitally, and never the two shall meet? And so you've got a big, first of all, you got a big data integrity issue. And then secondly, you have workflow challenge. And so what we try to get people to do is take a good hard look at things like at all levels of their business. You'd be surprised, like small organizations that are like 10 people have just as many problems as, a company with a couple hundred people. And it's like, it comes down to a few things. It's like, are they training people properly? Do they have processes in place? And is their operation systematized? And if those things are not the case, AI can do those things for you, but you have to be prepared for change. And so I think that's the thing that a lot of businesses don't understand, is that if you're going to adopt AI, you have to be open to a transformation. Like if you're looking for better ROI, it's going to mean different behavior.
And how should someone who's looking to lean in and take action, but also be responsible and be thinking about some of the unknowns, how to best position themselves in a responsible way, especially when thinking about, let's say, data governance, different factors that maybe had been looked at slightly differently before? What kind of guidelines are there for folks who are kind of venturing into something that feels really, really new? And how should they be, as leaders, thinking about how to move forward and take action, but also make sure that they're taking the right steps to be responsible? And maybe you can give me some examples of where things can perhaps go wrong.
Sure. So I wrote an article not too long ago, and I coined the term minimum viable governance, and I think this is really important, because we're still in somewhat of a nascent market, right? People are still trying to figure it out, but there are a few kind of baseline things that I think are really important. If you're going to use AI, in your workflows, the first thing you need to understand is what are the AI models you're using, and so we always, we encourage model cards, which basically are like, where is it domiciled? Where's the data sitting? Who has access to it? What regulatory pieces are there? Those kinds of things. So data protection is a huge thing when it comes to, using these channels, and making sure that if you have your model cards, that you really understand, like, if I put the information into this system, these are the things that happen to it. Having really clear outcomes laid out. It's like, we're going to systematize reports. And so, data in, analysis, compute, report out. So really understanding what that workflow is, who touches it, who's allowed to train a model, those kinds of things. So those kind of guardrails become really important, as you're starting to do those things. And it's interesting, one of the biggest demands or biggest trends that we've seen right now, and where I think AI is going to have the most impact, is actually on data. So we see organizations that are dependent on data. So whether they're an AI company themselves, or they're, a traditional type of company. Everybody's really dependent on data. And right now, data is just, in my opinion, chaos. It's like there's so much unstructured data out there. People don't know how to access it. It's time consuming. It's expensive, and rarely is there, good data available. And so, as you are easily available, I should say, there is good data out there, but it's either really expensive or it's hard to get at, or it's gate kept. And so, I think the next kind of big movement inside AI is going to be this democratizing of data and this and the access to data. And as organizations are building out, I think they really need to think about like how are they managing their IP? How are they managing their data? Where does that all live? And how can they make it most accessible for their company to leverage it?
My guess is that there's a lot of organizations that probably should have been thinking about things such as data governance, IP governance in a certain way, over the last 10 years, and maybe weren't as up to snuff as perhaps they should have been, but got away with it. And now we're moving into this new world where the risk is different, the upside is different, the opportunity cost is different. For folks who are really wanting to say, shake things up in a positive way, if they don't have the right people in their team who know how to ask the right questions, like I'm assuming that's where someone like you comes in, who can come in and help them do that. So maybe you can help me understand a little bit about that engagement piece, like how does an organization engage with you, not as a pitch or a commercial, but just so people understand that these resources exist and they're out there. And then I'll ask you maybe a second part is just like, in lieu of hiring you to come in and help them, what are some like basic steps they can take to like make sure they're equipped, and how can they maybe find talent or find the right experts, sort of a thing. So why don't we start with that? Like, what does it look like to engage with you? Just, I know there's probably different versions of this, but just a generalized view of what that means.
Yeah. So we do have, a kind of standard process that we go through, and we find it helps us really uncover where the state of where an organization is at. So we do have, I think I mentioned, an AI readiness assessment that we put people through, and we take them through kind of multiple levels of like how their organization is operating, where data is stored. So there's kind of a deep dive into what's the snapshot today of your business and how does it run? And then we start to look at where things are systematized and where they're not. And it's usually typically in the nots that there's opportunity for optimization of workflows. So we will map out of a business's operations, and then we'll look for points of efficiency. It's like, can this task be taken on and automated? Who does that impact in the organization? What other work can that free them up for? So we do kind of a whole racy chart if you will, of what's happening in the organization, who's doing what, but also what can automated systems do for them. And often organizations will come in with an idea like my problem is unstructured data and I need to take that unstructured data and make it structured. It's like, okay, where do you use that data? Who's touching that data? How is that data make the work you're doing more impactful? So we'll look at all those kind of points of contact, and then we will architect a system around it. And one of the things we always do is keep the human in the loop. Even though we're building agentic AI and we have that kind of orchestration layer, we never fully remove the human in the loop, because there always has to be those checkpoints, particularly when you're looking at regulatory compliance, making sure that somebody's got eyes on it. We basically do a deep dive, we scope it out, and then we build an architecture, and then we'll build a bespoke system. Or sometimes, much of what we have built already in our agentic framework is already there. And so it's a matter of just plugging the right agents in, and then we're off to the races.
Do you find that any of the groups that you work with, like once you've done the work, you recognize that maybe from a leadership level, there's still a bit of a gap? So as an example, like the regulatory framework might be a moving target at some point. How do folks stay on top of and make sure that they're paying attention where it counts and asking the right questions where it counts? And so, like, do do you ever suggest to them, hey, you might want to look for a new board member, or you might want to have us, like, you might want to check in with us once a year? Like, or do you see that that's not a problem? I guess I'm just curious where in the reality of things in the landscape these organizations tend to be from that perspective, leadership perspective.
You know what, to be honest, we see it all. So we, in the last, say, 24 months, like we've seen it where people are just like, give me an agent that spits out this, and that's all I want, right? And it's like, okay, we can do that. And then on the other side of it, we've seen leaders who are very, very engaged with their businesses and are very concerned. They're dependent on, they have privacy compliance that they need to be mindful of. And so they're very much on top of those types of things in their business. And they're very aware of like regulatory changes and what those governing bodies are putting out. I think we're seeing more and more engagement from the government on what do we need to be doing? What does responsible AI look like? And I think that, the businesses that are going to be successful are the ones that are on board with paying attention to those things. I think in this day and age, you can't be a leader in a company, particularly in a tech company, and not be paying attention to AI governance. Hugely important.
Are there any, not quick tips, but like if someone comes to you and says, this is something we should be thinking about, we haven't been thinking about, is there anywhere you're pointing them to as a starting point?
I personally went through the innovation governance program through the Council of Canadian Innovators, and I tend to point people back there a lot. It's a very good program in terms of overall business governance, but they are taking very seriously the aspects of the AI. And so I think there are training programs like that that I do point people to. I also, there's lots of consultation with government going on right now. And so I do the leaders that I do work with, we try to stay very much on top of, what the government is putting out in terms of opportunity for AI infrastructure or, opportunity for collaboration within Canada or those kinds of things. So, it's important that as leaders that we be paying attention to what's coming down the pipeline. It's so fast and furious right now. It's really hard to keep up. And one of the groups that I belong to is the Canadian AI Sovereignty Innovation Cluster. That group is really good at kind of pulling together experts and having the opportunity for consultation and that sort of thing. So I do point people in that direction. AI in BC is another great group. So there's lots of industry associations that are really thinking about AI and how to engage businesses. I think also like other industry associations. I'm here in the Okanagan part of BC, and there's a manufacturing organization that approached us to do like a session on like how do we think about manufacturing and AI. And it's like, I think those kinds of industry associations are great, because they're bringing the knowledge to the businesses. So I think, there's information everywhere now on AI. You can't go on LinkedIn without somebody offering their new course on AI. I think it's just getting your information from credible sources is really important.
I appreciate that. And I'll gather some of the organizations that you've mentioned. I'll put links in the show notes. So I'll just say that now in case I forget to say it later. I will plug the CCI's Innovation Governance Program. I've also participated in it. I haven't completed it, but I've done the first 2 of 3 stages, and it's wonderful. And it's really accessible, frankly.
Very accessible.
I think it's worth mentioning and giving them a shout out. So I'll put that link in the show notes as well. You do have a great Substack, and you release different articles, and it's worth paying attention to. So that might also be a great resource for our listeners to tune into and subscribe to your Substack. But recently you shared an article you wrote around how AI is not a bubble and you see it as a wildfire. And you drew some parallels as to why. And I'd love if you'd maybe help unpack the thinking behind that a little bit, because I do think that for folks who aren't in it day in and day out, they're kind of tired of this topic. And it's very easy, I think, to say it is a bubble. Why is it not? Let's dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I made the parallel, like in 2023, we unfortunately were evacuated from our home in the midst of a wildfire. And I made the parallel because we got very caught off guard. We were on the other side of the lake. Everybody said it's not going to jump the lake, and don't worry about it. And then the next thing I know, we're evacuating with the clothes on our back. So I kind of think that some people are caught, thinking, oh, this isn't, it's just whatever, right? It's just a new tool and it's fine and it's a bubble and it's not going to be, anything that's going to impact me. But the fact is that the landscape is changing, right? The landscape of business is changing. AI is going to be everywhere. You can't go to a website without a chatbot. Most of the time you're getting, phone calls from the doctor's office. That's probably AI. It's just integrated and we don't even really realize how much it's integrated. So it's not going away. These tools are leveling up how we are doing business. And I think, if you look at like crypto and its bubble or whatever, it's like, yeah, it went crazy and then it had a correction. But it hasn't gone away. It's just become more regulated and it's become more stable and, maybe a better investment now unless you bought Bitcoin at $2,000. So I think what we're seeing now is a little bit of the maturing of AI into kind of everyday businesses. The landscape of business is changing, like how I interact with an e-commerce site or how I interact with phone calls that I get. Those things change because of how AI is underpinning some of those actions, and that won't change. I think what we'll see is just a better way of doing business, a better opportunity for people to be more connected one-on-one versus depending on people to do kind of the lower level work. I just don't think it's going to go backwards in any way. I think it's going to just continue to go forwards and we're going to continue to see advances in it. And yeah, it burst on the scene like everything else, it changing everything else. And I think what we'll see emerging is some really, amazing new ways to do business and really much more meaningful connection, people to people, worker to worker versus, the way it used to be.
It's funny. I think from like the public consumption standpoint, the AI piece and where the bubble side might come in is, of course, there's probably investment in AI, like companies that are going out and raising money, et cetera. But from the public standpoint, they're probably seeing, oh, now I can make cooler AI generated videos and photos and all of that stuff, which is fun and creative. And there's probably, there's some real business use cases behind some of that stuff. But it really does seem like it's the unsexy, untalked about, under discussed pieces that matter. But what I really do love about the way that you're discussing this as a real insider, it's this human aspect and the sort of language around this technology that most of us can digest, understand, think about how does it impact me and my workflow, my business. And you said you come from a background kind of, and correct me if I'm using the wrong term, but like HR kind of environment. How do you think some of these maybe younger or more entry-level folks should be thinking about how this technology might not just affect them, but like how they might be able to bring value to their organizations? Are you having these kinds of conversations even just at dinner tables?
Yeah, actually, that's a big one right now. Is like, okay, if all these low level jobs lower level jobs are going away, what does that mean for entry level? And I think it's really important that we're educating kind of the next generation around how to use the tools and how to be impactful with them, and teaching critical thinking skills. Whether that's at the university level or in an internship or, just at a starting level, it's like, using the tools to set yourself up for success. So I'll give you an example. If you're a recruiter and you're screening resumes, you can, it's a great example. You can use, the tools to screen the resumes, but really you can't get a feel for the candidate. So if you're looking for certain things, you can set up prompts to look for particular things in somebody's resume and shortlist for you. But where you're going to gain more skills is in that interview with the candidates. You're gonna be able to learn more about them, learn about whether they're a fit for the organization by meeting with them face to face. There's nothing that AI can replace. That's what I mean. Like, you can have a recruiter who can use the tools to find, the candidates with the skill sets they're looking for, and that will free them up for more time for face-to-face interviews and to do the meaningful work of finding the right people for their organization. So understanding how to apply the tools to the work that can be automated, and really honing in on the work that can't be automated.
I am thinking a lot about this next generation of talent, really, and folks being able to figure out how to take those leaps, not just to have an income, but also to be able to, go from one stage to the next stage and have that sort of familiarity with the ins and outs of any sort of industry. It's an interesting thing, but I think there's a lot of sort of self-talk right now, and a lot of just noise that's sort of getting in the way of people really figuring out where we're at. Do you see, not necessarily related to workers or to talent, but just in general when it comes to the space you're in and the work that you're doing, do you think there's any major misunderstanding or anything that's really being missed in the narrative around where we're going with AI and agentic type of technology?
I think that, I think the thing that I come across a lot of is, we're so risk adverse in Canada. And so, and I might take this in a little bit of a different direction, but one of the things that drives me crazy is, this investment. And we touched on it earlier, investment into AI. It's like, to me, it's very clear where those value propositions lie right now. So it's niche application layer. It's not the office tools. Those are all going to go away or be taken over by the Googles and the Microsofts of the world. It's niche application. It's data. Again, data is a big problem, and AI can solve a lot of those challenges around data for us. And it's infrastructure. So we have some pretty awesome opportunity in Canada, and personally would love to see more early stage founders being funded who are thinking about niche applications, who are building those niche applications, who are building access to data and creating access to data and infrastructure. We need sovereign infrastructure. We can't be vulnerable the way we have been in the past. And, we need to really think about, what does it mean? Where does our data live? How do we store it? How do we compute? How do we, continue to run and grow and innovate? And I think there is amazing investment opportunities in those three layers. But as Canadians, we tend to be so risk adverse. You can go down to Sand Hill Row in Silicon Valley with a good idea and walk out with a check for $50,000 to get started. We just don't have that here. We don't have this culture of innovation. And the current administration is, let's pump up administration. They put all this money into defense and dual use and into AI and compute and quantum. And it's like, we're still following the same old patterns of how that money gets accessed. Like even today, there was an announcement from the BDC where they've got $4 billion to put into defense. And AI is going to be a big part of that, but it's still running through, a big bank. It's not going to the innovators necessarily. We're still following these very traditional means of how we distribute funds. And I think we have a real opportunity in front of us. And I really hope that there is a shift in how we fund startups and how we fund innovation in this country. I think that has to happen. Whether it's going to happen or not, I don't know. I'm hopeful.
I'd love to unpack that just a tad bit. And I hear you, and the things you're speaking about resonate. I think it's a common theme. For the sake of trying to see some big forward momentum or forward leap over the next 5 years or even decade in terms of startup culture, innovation culture, that 10 years is a long time, of course, but it just sounds like there needs to be such a cultural shift, such an appetite shift. Although I do think that this is an interesting moment in time because I think it's been brought to light in a different way because of all of the things that are going on in the world. So I'm wondering if there's anything you're seeing that's making you hopeful that, leaders, and I don't necessarily mean government leaders, but just folks from the innovation communities are driving more connectivity and finding new pathways to capital. I'm kind of just making things up here, but I'm wondering if there's anything that you're seeing that you're this could be a catalyst for some shift in how we think about innovation as Canadians.
So I am hopeful. This past summer or early fall, I went to Toronto for the CEO summit. David Osip gave the keynote at the dinner. So David, of course, one of Canada's success stories, and he basically said, he got up and the number one message he gave is that we need to buy from one another. You've got 200 CEOs sitting in this room. We all need to be buying from one another. It's kind of like that adage. It's like, okay, well, we won't buy from a Canadian company until they've proven themselves elsewhere. And so we are seeing kind of this narrative shift, around what it means to procure from, the guy down the road versus the guy in Austin, Texas. Why it's important that we all, start to buy Canadian, not just, the apples from our trees, but the tech that's being built here in Canada. We are seeing that narrative shift. And certainly in the time since I attended the CEO Summit, I personally have had great conversations with dozens of CEOs who are experiencing the same thing. It's like, okay, we are seeing more people, more organizations being willing to look at a Canadian solution versus, a US or European solution first. And so that's a shift, that is a big shift in the industry. I'm hopeful with the messaging from the current government. I'm hopeful the fact that we have an AI minister. That makes me think that there is an attitude change. We've heard a lot about, creating a culture of innovation being super important. When the budget came out, we saw a real focus on, buy Canadian, innovation, all of those kinds of things. And so that starts to permeate, the collective mind here in Canada. And I think we will start to see shifts towards choosing to purchase or buy services or product from Canadian companies versus companies from elsewhere, as a first line. Like maybe in the end you don't, but at least organizations and companies are starting to think more about, how do I procure from other Canadian companies? And I think that's probably the number one thing.
I'm really enjoy that you use that word so many times, procure and procurement. I'm just going to out myself and claim major ignorance. That's a word that I never really heard before this year. When it came to my attention, I was like, what does this mean? What really does this mean? And it was around the themes that you're talking about. It was around the sort of buying from one another, especially in the tech sector. And that's what I was like, oh, this is very interesting. And then I threw the word out there in a conversation in the governance program, actually. And I very quickly realized that people had a different understanding of procurement. And there's maybe a stigma attached to that word because they have different affiliations. And so I'm sitting in a live group conversation virtually, and I'm Googling. I'm oh, okay, I can tell they are not hearing the way I meant to say this. Anyways, I'm digressing, but I think it's interesting. And I think that unless there's a new word that comes out, it's worth saying because I think it is an important value system and it's an important practice and it very much can lead to really important change. And I think it could easily be dismissed by just being seen the wrong way.
I think people tend to think that it's, I'm procuring a battleship. It's
yeah. Or forced government, purchasing. Anyways, I don't even know if I'm going to keep this. I might cut it out, but I just love that you said that. The one thing we didn't dig into, and I'm curious if we might be able to speak to it for just a couple of minutes. Do Indigenous groups in Canada play any part in AI innovation?
Absolutely. Indigenous groups play a very important role in the AI landscape in Canada. We are working towards partnership with a organization called Robson Inc. They're looking to put together an Indigenous sovereign network across the country for access to compute. And I think if you think about who has thought about sovereignty the most in our Canadian collective, it's probably Indigenous groups. And so there's already a mind share of how to think about, sovereignty. They've laid lots of groundwork. And I think we can really learn from that and take those frameworks back into how we create sovereignty in our own systems. So I think there is real opportunity to look at various Indigenous groups and what they've done. And there's also a number of I know a few Indigenous owned AI businesses who are doing like amazing work. I think there's just a massive opportunity to learn from them.
Karen, I've really appreciated your ability to really bring this conversation down to earth in many ways, but also down to like the Canadian perspective, because I do think that matters. And probably for reasons that some regular day-to-day folks aren't thinking about, how the advancements in our sovereignty, advancements in our economy, and just making sure that we continue living our lives as Canadians, living to our values and with the quality of life that we want. Like this stuff all actually plays a part. And so I appreciate you being able to kind of highlight some of these things in a way that I'm hoping folks can understand. As we go into 2026 and just as we close the show, I'm just wondering, what are you thinking about for the upcoming year? Where are you going to be spending most of your time or learning or client kind of projects or work? Is there any sort of theme that's top of mind for 2026?
One of the things I'm personally really passionate about is empowering founders and creating like a seat of innovation. And for a long time, I just believe that it's been really hard for especially early stage entrepreneurs to get concepts off the ground. Yes, there's accelerators and incubators and those kinds of things, but it's always almost like out of pocket funded or bootstrapped by founders. And I just think we need to have more of an innovation mindset. And so one of the things I'm really excited about is I'm in the process of working with a few individuals to put together a fund that is going to be focused on early stage AI in Canada, using the AI tools to do the evaluation. So coming away from some of those more traditional ways of evaluating businesses and using the tools to really like model and look at what ideas will accelerate in the market, and to use some of the agentic scaffolding tools that we have to help accelerate the build, so that again, founders can focus on the most important piece of their business, which is the go-to-market. How do we sell it? Who do we sell it to? How do we get in front of my customers? Because ideas are a dime a dozen, and you can build tech pretty easily now, but it's all about how you take it to market. So I think my 2026 is going to be very heavily focused on building that fund and building, those wraparound services for the entrepreneurs.
That's wonderful. Just off the cuff, I'm curious, are you seeing next year being super busy? I'm just thinking about how there's probably a lot of companies and organizations like maybe taking a wait and see approach, just given where they're worried about maybe the economy going. Can you give me just a quick magnifying glass? Are you busy?
Off my feet busy. I mean, we're going into the holidays, and I've barely done one stitch of Christmas shopping. So it's like I'm so busy with my business and what we have in front of us as our clients prep for 2026, and as we look at projects. I actually think it's going to be an incredible year for innovation. Just what we have on our horizon and what we're seeing in the market.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, Karen, thank you so much for joining us on Canada Now. I'm very excited to be able to introduce you on this topic to the audience.
Hope it was useful.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would like to encourage listeners to get to know who you are and get to know Atomic 47. So I will put links to the company in the show notes, links perhaps to your LinkedIn, Karen, your Substack. Are there any other places where I should guide people to?
On our website, on the services page, there is, if you scroll down, there's resources. So if anybody's interested in understanding their own AI readiness, that tool is there. You can put yourself through the self-assessment and get a sense of whether or not you're ready to implement. And of course, if you need help with that, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate the show, share it with your friends, and know that we're also on YouTube. So find us there if you're not watching. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Till next time, have a good day.